So welcome, Dr. Skinner. The floor is yours. You must be able to share the slides if you need to.
Yes, I'm very. Can you hear me, by the way?
Yes.
Gosh, I am very technologically challenged. So I'm always surprised you can thing works at all. But I have do have a slide, and I've got a PA that's going to talk me through it if it fails. But anyway, we'll come on to that later.
Okay.
Right, time to begin.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Right. Well, Dr. Navar's a hard act to follow. I'll say a little about myself, because it probably has a relevance. I did unusually have a good introduction to Jung as an undergraduate. That's very unusual in a British university. Then had analysis from an Alexander John Layard, who's very well known in the UK in the mid-70s, and then post-analysis supervision, including somebody was the analysand of Maria von Franz. So had a sort of good analytical training, but these were the days when there was no other training in Jungian analysis apart from the analysis. And when I left London in the early 80s, I more or less lost touch with the Jungian community, but always continued working in the Jungian manner. And I think it's, well, I'm certain, in fact, that the Jungian background I had orientated me in looking for an Islamic model for psychotherapy, which we'll be discussing, and particularly with the help, of course, of Islamic scholars, taking from Al-Ghazali, but also others, Ibn Arabi and many other classical Muslim scholars. But my remembrance of Jungian theory is now faint after 40-odd years. So I look forward to the comment and questions that hopefully will come afterwards, because I suspect this audience will be far more conversant with Jung than I now am. So my overall view is that there are issues between Islam and Jung theologically, which we might touch on later. And when I was in Ireland in the 70s, these theological issues were hotly debated between the Dominicans and the Jesuits. I rather suspect it was the Jesuits that favoured Jung's theological soundness and the Dominicans that didn't. Nonetheless, there are, in my view, or there is a substantial consensus between Jungian and Islamically derived psychotherapy. And so I'll be speaking to that. And starting with, if I can manage the technology, a model of the self derived mainly from Al-Ghazali, which was first published pretty much in this form in 1989, and has the, I suppose, the merit of what in Islam we call an ijma, a sort of use over a period of years that people have found helpful, and therefore that sort of proves there's some truth in it, at least. Now, if I can, oh gosh, I mean, what do I have to press to get the
In the bottom banner, it should say share screen.
Share screen. That's right. I was told that. Right.
And then you should choose the whatever window, and you just double click it, and that should.
Or double click it. Right. What now, Alan?
Thank you, Mark.
Click that. Yeah. I'm terribly sorry about this.
No.
No, not happening.
Sure.
There it is. There it is.
Yeah.
No.
Well, there's your computer. If you just go to your computer and open whatever, I think we're going to be able to see it.
Open emails. I think we're going to give it a miss. I've now managed to lose the most of what I was looking at before. How do I get the thing back? I mean, I've also got a
Sorry.
stepdaughter with me. Can we
I don't know where you've got it. Okay, never mind.
oh, new technology. Have you any idea what I press now to get the picture back, Aman?
To
Need to reduce the desktop so you can see, it's just hiding behind this image of your desktop. So if you can reduce the desktop, it's probably lurking behind there.
Do you have the file on your desktop? Because we can see that. If you can find it on there, we'll.
I don't really know what a file is. Well, I can see myself, and I can see 3 other people. Can the rest of you see me?
Maybe
Yes, yes.
Yes.
All right.
If you want to stop sharing, I can help you stop sharing. Do you want to do that and go back to the window with everybody?
Yeah, it's pretty nice. Can you do that?
There we are.
Right. Oh, there we are. So it was you pressing buttons, not me. Okay, so the diagram, I think, makes it easier to grasp, but it's not necessary. So I think it is Islamically, we can see 4 major parts of the self, starting with the concept of ruh, spirit, soul, which is understood to be that which connects us with God. But we're also told in Islamic tradition that we're not told much about ruh, that basically the mind cannot cope with it. So we know it's there. We know it's I suppose we normally refer to as the soul, but it's something which connects us with the divine and also has a sense of inspiration, as it would in all, I think, the prophetic religions. So ruh is something that comes into us. And of significance in therapy is it's coming into us in the way of giving us insight and revelation in the form of, through dreams, occasionally visions, inspired thoughts, inspired intuitions, of which various names are given. The greatest that the ordinary human being can attain to is was described by the word ilham, which is also a direct receiving of understanding. There's no barrier. It does, I think, describe what Jung went through in his crisis, if you like, in 1913, 1914 and onwards, where he says he has to let go of his intellect, in effect, that had he not done so, he'd risk going mad. And he has to allow the revelations to come, and then he just writes it down, or he draws pictures or whatever to express it. So that would be ilham, and of perhaps lesser import are basira, seeing things, sometimes used for sort of seeing things at a distance that the eye could not possibly see, of firasa, sometimes also used for sort of inspired induction, where suddenly a gestalt comes together, suddenly you can understand something. But again, it can also apply to sort of thoughts that are incoming that give you an understanding. And khata, or like an inspired intuition, which is something I think we'd all be familiar with in therapy, where we suddenly something comes to us, we say it and it hits mark, or we suddenly feel we shouldn't be saying something and only later understand why. But I'll deal with khata later, because khata needn't necessarily come from a divine source. What then we normally deal with in the psychology is not ruh directly, but the container for ruh, which several terms are used, but the one Al-Ghazali prefers is qalb, or heart, meaning an inner heart. And this we can see as being really the center of the self. It's the part of the self which experiences and contains the spiritual inspirations, as in the dreams or the ilham or whatever. But as well as being an organ that receives, qalb is understood to contain the sense of fitra. And this, I think, is a crucial concept, and it's one which I think we can relate to Jungian theory well. So fitra meaning, fitra meaning, in a sense, what is natural, but it is understood to mean a instinct that is implanted within us. And I think you can begin to see the similarities with Jung's concept of self, an instinct that is placed within us that draws us back to the divine. And it seemed to be rooted in a primordial witnessing of the oneness of God before our conception. So this is also understood to be the experience of total absorption in love without ego interfering. So the memory of this is understood to be within us. It's innate. And there's an instinct also, because you fitra both as a noun and as a verb, that is pulling us back to that state. And in its outer aspects is pulling us towards or giving us an instinct for whatever is good for us. So what it's good to eat at this moment, what profession it might be good to join or not join, and so on. But the fundamental importance of fitra is this drawing us back to a state of annihilation of self and annihilation in love. So the memory is there of that original witnessing. So when we speak about doing zikr, we're talking about remembering. We're trying to attach ourselves to the memory of that primordial state. That is my understanding. And we can see how this sort of operates in all spheres, but particularly, and I only caught the end of the last conversation, and particularly in Al-Ghazali's view, and even more explicitly in Ibn Arabi, sexual union is seen as the prime way in which we taste this fana, this dissolving of self into love and into the other in this life. So Al-Ghazali speaks of sexual union as being the taste of paradise. So we can see that our movement towards togetherness, towards joining with others, is an expression of this fundamental instinct, which we can call fitra. But more broadly, it's what is repairing us, balancing us. It's a divine force within the self that is, if we're in touch with it, is giving us guidance in all matters and is helping us resolve whatever things are there that are blocking us from experience this inner wholeness. I think that this understanding that there's an instinct within us towards the annihilation of self at least touches upon Sabina Spreiding's view of the death instinct, which we know she discussed with Jung. I mean, I don't think she wrote much about it, but it does seem to me that her understanding of it is closer to this Islamic idea of fana, of losing oneself in love and into the other, than Freud's concept of death instinct. And if he did borrow that from Spreiding, then I think he completely misunderstood it. Also within qalb, so we see qalb as the container that receives what is sent to us from God, but also it has inborn characteristics. And another of these, apart from that instinct of fitra, is sometimes referred to as mithal. I think it's a Persian word, but it refers to the faculty within the heart that will translate a spiritual reality into a form that we can understand. So, for example, in the true dream, we receive a revelation of some sort, we receive an understanding of something, we receive guidance, but it comes to us in the form of images that we are then able to interpret, or if not us, somebody else. So there's I think, a strong similarity between Jung's view of archetypes, at least as being based on an innate process, something that is born within us, and an Islamic view, and certainly in practice, both traditions are looking at or are understanding the concept of the true dream, that things come to us from within the self, and these are not subjective. They are not the products of our ego, of our intellect. This is coming from or is giving us a much deeper wisdom. And the other faculty of qalb that I mentioned is what Al-Ghazali describes as the fifth level of akal. So sometimes the Quran uses different terms for this inner center of the self. So qalb is the one that Al-Ghazali refers, but there are others. And sometimes the Quran refers to akal, which is normally translated as intellect, as being the center. And it seems that Al-Ghazali sort of squares this by saying there's, I think, four levels of, or four functions of akal, four functions of cognition, which he took from the Greeks, remembrance and deduction, observation, induction maybe, which are essentially for our use in this world. So we observe things, we can deal with practical affairs with them, we can sort out our tax returns and so on. But Al-Ghazali says there's a fifth level, which is part of the qalb. So there is also a guidance, like a divine guidance, or a guidance that comes beyond the self, that comes beyond our earthly observation, which comes into our intellectual understanding, and which should be guiding it. So I'll come on to this concept, this other part of the self of akal, which is root Arabic, means a shackle. It's something that binds or something that ties. So in its outer functions, akal is understood to be, as Al-Ghazali puts it, it's the reins on the horse. It's what we use to tie or control the forces, in what I'll come to next, the hawa nafs, our drives, our passions, our animal energies, if you like, and also, in a sense, to shackle or to control the forces external to us, so that we're able to fill in our tax return and we're able to design a house and that sort of thing. So that's how it's normally understood. It's intellection, cognition, and it's something we're given to control these other energies within the self. But it's also understood, of course, to be something that can also constrict or shackle what is coming in from the inner center, what is coming in from the qalb. So the ego, if you like, our center of awareness, we normally associate with akal, needs to be able to let go as well as to control. If it doesn't, then, well, either it's used incorrectly. So if akal then tries to turn behind itself and understand spiritual realities, rather than us letting go and receiving, then you risk madness. And this is something I think both Jung notes, and he quotes Dionysius of the Areopagites dictum, that you can't understand with the mind what is beyond the mind, that we reach God in the deep gloom of ignorance, not in the light of reason. And this, I think, would be an Islamic position, as well as a Christian and as well as a Jungian. And again, we come back to Jung's experience in the 1914 period, when he describes having to do this, of having to let go of the shackle of his intellect. So we have either that consequence, or the channel between the qalb and the akal and then the rest of the self is strangled. That there is no longer any guidance even operating onto the akal. It's subject to whatever is going on externally. It's a hadith from the Prophet, peace and blessings be upon him, that describes some reasoning being like sorcery. And I think that would apply to that. So akal needs to be firm and strong and capable in dealing with the outer world, but it also needs to be able to surrender in order to let things coming from a deeper source of the self. And I think we opened a comment, but I think that you'd recognize that this is much the same as Jung's thinking. He often speaks to the fact that the age in which he's living, never mind ours, has become too intellectual, too much emphasis on akal, and a loss, a detachment, denial of things that are much deeper and much more powerful and beautiful within the self. And then the hawa nafs, or hawa, normally translated as animal self. It applies to the drives, energies that we are given for essentially our purposes in this world. There is a view of these, so this sort of, hunger and desire for money and desire for sex and so on, that these forces, this really comes from Ibn Arabi, actually have their own fitra, their own nature, their own wish to worship God, but do so through us. And therefore, in their nature, in their own fitra, they are disposed to be helpful to us. This is a slightly different view, I think, to what you'd find in the Eastern religions and probably Christianity. So, and I think the analogy that Al-Ghazali uses, because it takes it from the Greeks, the rider on the horse, is an apt one, because if you ride, or indeed you use any trained animal, a hunting dog or hawk, you know that the animal is working within its fitra, works within its own nature, or should do. I mean, you can train an animal badly. I knew somebody once who bought a circus horse and couldn't do a thing with it. But that's because it was trained contrary to its nature as a horse. If you're trained within its nature, then it has a disposition to help us. And there is a fundamental sort of Islamic view that what is inner is also what is outward. So we can learn about our own selves by looking at the external world. And we can see that the way a hunting dog behaves is really how the forces that we would call our animal forces within the self should also behave. They want to help us, but they're trained. The hunting, the pointer will run up to a tussock where there's a rabbit in it. That's in its nature as a hunting dog. It smelt the rabbit, it goes to it, but then it stops and it points so that its master can shoot it. Something similar, a retriever or whatever. So ideally,
Skinner, I just want to let you know that we have 5 minutes left. So
right, 5. Okay.
Yeah.
So these forces should be well trained and also in their own way of worshipping God. The interesting Al-Ghazali, when he talks about how you have to train these to be able to sort of really access the inner part of the self, there needs to be a lack of turbulence in these levels of the self. And he speaks about the need to train the pig and the dog, basically greed and aggression. He doesn't mention sex, and I think this is because there was seen no problem with sexuality in Al-Ghazali's period, either theologically or practically. There is an understanding that you can have, in the Islamic tradition, that you can have conflicts that arise between akal and the drives and what the drives have caused you to do that are coming from the hawa. In other words, there is an understanding of a personal unconscious, which the terms kuf and gaflak, sort of forgetfulness, can be applied. But my experience is the degree to which a personal unconscious operates is highly cultural. I certainly noticed the difference when in the 70s I started practicing with Muslim clients, and in particularly with people that live very simple, natural lives, the Bedouin and gypsies that I saw a number of in more recent years. It's almost like the personal unconscious is not significant, at least not in the way that was to be understood by Freud and probably by Jung. And we need to bear this in mind. Jung is also dealing with and immersed in a particular culture. And then the body, which I think pay more attention to in Islamic psychology than perhaps Jung did, though I'm open to comment on this. There's an understanding that the body is linked to the spiritual center, it's linked to the heart. Now, Islam is an embodied religion. And so there's an importance in the body also, and again, Ibn Arabi deals with this particularly, of being able to operate within its own fitra. And it gives rise in therapy to the importance of sunnah sports, of course, such as riding, swimming, but also other things. Cricket can have the same sort of consequences to it, and the zikr of the body in hadra, amongst other ways. So if I summarize what I think are the points of similarity and difference between Jung and the Islamic model as I understand it, one is that the Jung's concept of self seems to me in practice and how we would use it clinically to be really the same as the Islamic understanding of qalb and fitra. You know, the understanding that therapeutically we essentially have to bring person in touch with that, and you can sit back. That the effort is the person being able to come open to the guidance which is particular for them within the self. That there is a personal unconscious, there's a shadow that may need dealing with before that can happen. That we have to understand that akal can be a barrier to this process. That people need sometimes to let go of akal and simply receive what is coming in from the inner self. There's an understanding of archetypes. I mean, there may be a whole seminar on what the differences might be between an Islamic and a Jungian view of archetypes, but certainly both traditions would say that there's an innate ability within the self to produce symbols that have power, that have numinosity, and which have deep meaning. And of course, there's a recognition there are different levels of dream, and it's an Islamic tradition, the true dream. In Jung's, there's the collective dream, which is the one that is most important therapeutically. I would say, I don't know if you've noticed this, when I was first in practice in the 70s, I would have patients that typically went through the classical Jungian sequence of dreams, the shadow, the animus anima, the guide figures, ending up with a mandala. I haven't really noticed this in the last 20 years. I don't know whether others have, whether it's just me and my therapy, or whether there's been a cultural change. And then finally, I'd say both emphasize that what is perhaps the most important therapeutic element is the state of the therapist. Both that the therapist themselves has gone through things. And I noticed this very early on in my career when I was in Belfast and thought I was going to be shot by the IRA, and got over my fear of death. Immediately that week, 3 patients came to me and said, funny thing, I was thinking about death and I'm not afraid of it. But it's also about other characteristics. Jung speaks of this. And particularly, I think this must have been touched on by Dr. Durrani, of the power of love in this. We should love our patients, that it's our spiritual state. And if we're spiritually connected, then the sign of that is the love that we feel in ourselves and the love that we feel for others. And yes, I think I'll leave it there. I think time is up, and the questions for me will be, I hope, very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Skinner. We just have a few minutes for questions, but I do want to remind everybody that we will have a full hour tomorrow to discuss all the presentations from the Islam conference. So if anybody has a comment or a question, please just raise your hand. Catherine?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Skinner. I liked how you began with talking about ruach. I don't
Ruach, yes.
Ruach.
Yeah, I'm actually saying Hebrew. It's the same word. Breath.
Yeah, because that word, of course, is also found in Judaism, and then also transferred over into Christianity as well, although it was more used as a name for people who made the migration kind of out of the whole Judaic world, and they ended up in Germany. My husband is part German, and his family name is Rausch, and that's supposed to be a pejorative term, meaning the noisy people. Oh, those noisy people over there. So it's the sound of spirit.
Yeah.
Ruach to me is the Holy Spirit that's connecting the physical dross to the divine. So it's a very powerful force. Thank you so much.
I just, an interesting synchronicity, I didn't mention synchronicities. I had a patient who said he had a dream. Well, no, he suddenly had the impulse in church to ask to experience the breath of God. And it was explicitly those words. 2 weeks later, he meets a woman called Rahel.
There you go. Yeah.
That is, exactly. And he had no idea, because I know a little Hebrew, as Arabic's very close to it. When I pointed this out to him, that his dream had literally been, his prayer had literally been fulfilled.
Yeah. In the world. Yeah.
It's these miracles, I think. I mean, I think that therapy is really the journey into the miraculous. And I think that both we understand this from the Islamic tradition and we understand it from the Jungian tradition, and indeed probably others.
Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible, because that's how you see, like you said, Islam is an embodied religion. Love comes walking. What's coming? Love. It comes walking. And that's all you have to do, is just be there. So thank you again.
Beautifully put.
So I think Fred, and then we close this plenary session.
Yeah. Okay, so 2 observations. Thank you both, Rasjid and Stephen, because you've put the focus on the religious function of the psyche, which I think is an aspect of Jung that's slightly fallen into neglect, and I'm really pleased that it's come back into focus, and you've reminded us how potent it is. I just wanted Rasjid to tell a little story about the fitra in animals. I don't know if I got time to do this. Adolf Portman, who was a Goethe-inspired zoologist and regular Erinus lecturer, once devised an experiment to illustrate what he called the inwardness of animal life. And he took a little bird, the male species of which is very fond of fighting, and he put the bird in a cage, and he isolated the bird so it couldn't fight. And in a few weeks, it got very dejected and depressed. So then he bought a sparring partner and put him in the cage, and the 2 birds had one hell of a punch up. And afterwards, the bird was much happier and returned normal patterns of eating and feeding. Portman continued to observe the bird, and what the bird used to do was to go into the corner of the cage where he'd had the fight and reenact it on his own.
Gosh.
Yeah, the inwardness of animal life, and that fitted
Yeah.
with me with Ibn Arabi and the Fitra.
Absolutely. It's a really good story. Thank you for that, Andrew. I'll remember that and bring it into my next lecture.
Okay, I'll send you the source.
Thank you.
I think it's in Bonn, France.
Well,
Okay, thank you very much, Rasjid. It was
thank
great.
you so much, everybody. Mary Beth, do you want to close?
Well, this is really enjoying these presentations. And, you know, this focus on the mutuality and the mirroring and the experience of desire in terms of love in order to be known.
Yeah.
And really sitting with that today. And I think also creating this community here that we're known to each other through these beautiful words and ideas. So thank you.
Thank you.
So next we're going into our next section, which is arts-based.